is it possible to experience trauma so severe that our mind has to make an alternate reality to be able to deal with it? That is kind of the main theme in this little book right here, Slaughterhouse Five by Kurt Vonnegut, which I just finished. And this is kind of continuing the journey of reading some postmodern books lately. And that one in particular is considered kind of a poster child for a postmodern novel. It's a quick read too. I mean, the copy I have is 215 pages, and Kurt Vonnegut is known as a postmodern author. I think he kind of stayed in a lane of sci-fi for most of his career, and this is certainly his most famous book. And I'm going to talk a little bit about it today. This will be relatively spoiler-free. It's just going to be kind of setting up the story. I was highly intrigued by this book. I wanted to read this after I read White Noise by Don DeLillo, which I absolutely loved. I've read one other Vonnegut. I actually read his debut novel, which is called Player Piano, which has a lot of similar themes to what we have going on in the world today about AI replacing jobs and things like that, and the paranoia that people have. I really enjoyed that book. But I noticed it's not really mentioned a lot when it comes to Vonnegut's best works, but I did enjoy it. When it comes to this book, though, Slaughterhouse Five, this is an odyssey. And if you haven't read Vonnegut or just postmodern type literature before, it might be kind of surprising to delve into this. Sorry, a huge goal was just scored in the World Cup in the background. That's distracting me here. That was crazy. This book is, if you go into it trying to read or think that you're going to get just a straightforward story, something that's just, here's what's going on, you're not going to get that. This is a fractured. I've heard people compare this to like an early Quentin Tarantino movie, where if you've ever seen like Pulp Fiction or Reservoir Dogs and stuff like that, things are edited, cut up in different ways. I also think of Memento from Christopher Nolan. Things are kind of jumbled. It doesn't take place all in a straight line. It's not a linear story. With this one, we're following the main character, which is Billy Pilgrim. And Vonnegut, very early on in the book, does a very interesting thing where he's kind of speaking as the writer of the book. Like, it's basically metafiction. He's speaking as Kurt Vonnegut, presumably, as a narrator, saying, some of these things happened, which of them really did and which haven't, I can't totally be sure, things like that, as he's setting up the story. Now, he doesn't call himself Kurt Vonnegut necessarily, but he is the narrator breaking the fourth wall, so it were, speaking to you as you're the reader. And we're following the main protagonist, which is Billy Pilgrim, who was a prisoner of war in Dresden, Germany, back during World War II. And if you are unfamiliar with that, basically, Dresden was one of the many like war atrocities that happened during World War II. Many, many people died. I guess there's been varying reports of how many people died, and I'm not into this, but people will compare that to what else happened during that time, and who had the most deaths, what was the most violent, and comparing and measuring violence and things like that, which I'm not interested in. But the fact remains, and Kurt Vonnegut actually did experience some of this stuff, so this is where it came from. And what we are taken on in this book, again, if you're looking for something that's going to be a linear story, you don't really get that here. This is basically a mental trip of some sort. You can look at it as actually happening. It's up to you to decide. But we are following Billy Pilgrim essentially time traveling throughout this entire novel. Now, I've never been into that kind of stuff or like sci-fi or anything like that. I don't want to say sci-fi is a large umbrella, but I've usually not been into like, mind-bending, alternate reality type stuff. But that's really what we're getting here, and I think the way Vonnegut does it is amazing. And I don't think it alienates you, interesting word to use here too, as a reader when you get into these things. And the reason I say that is because, yes, there's an alien abduction in this as well. Again, not really a spoiler, something that's pretty well known about the book. So we have Billy Pilgrim basically bouncing between his time in World War II, his time after it, this abduction by aliens, and what they do with and to him how he's put on display with them, and some of the morals and values and the ways that these aliens look at the world, which actually I found to be the most interesting part of the book. And some of the ways that they do look at the world compared to earthlings, as they call us, was very thought provoking and interesting. And I enjoyed it. I thought the way that they looked at things were actually kind of maybe a helpful way of looking at things, which maybe that was the point of Vonnegut's here. But we're following Billy Pilgrim through all these different things, his war buddies along the way, what happened in the war to him, what did or didn't happen. And to me, it really is an examination of, he saw these horrible things. He was a prisoner of war, for God's sake, like in Dresden, and saw all these horrible atrocities. And this is kind of up for you to decide, but are we basically going through a mental break, like a psychological break of Billy Pilgrim throughout this book and experiencing the fractured reality that he can remember? Is the time traveling actually happening throughout his life? Or are we just in his mind maybe long after he's, been out of war and it's an elderly man in a bed somewhere and these are just the things he's experiencing? Regardless, the journey is insane, and I don't find the jumping around to different parts and different stages of his life to be that jarring. I think it's a fun ride actually to go on. And another thing as well, a major kind of known thing about this book is that the idea of death has been so kind of bastardized to Billy Pilgrim because of all the death that he saw along his journey, that anytime there's a death, whether it is, hundreds of thousands of people killed or, 10, 15 people killed on an airplane or a bug getting stepped on, is followed with the phrase, "so it goes," which is a very, I've heard people criticize this part of the book, the fact that the "so it goes" is mentioned so many times that it gets annoying to them. I understood what the vehicle of it was, and I thought it was well used by Vonnegut. Yeah, it does get kind of annoying that this guy keeps saying "so it goes" after every single death, but what they're trying to illustrate, I believe, is that to experience everything that Billy Pilgrim did in World War II and seeing this kind of death, you have to separate yourself from it or you can't even deal with reality anymore, which is sad and scary to think of. But he starts basically looking at it like, yeah, people die. And he also kind of gets that perspective from these aliens that do abduct him as well. Part of their thought process is that you're never really at one point, whether you are dead or whether you're here, there, or whatever section of your life. Everything that has ever happened to you is all just existing simultaneous. So you could see, oh man, this person just died. That's a horrible thing. And that's how earthlings may look at it. But they're seeing like, well, yes, I mean, I see that he's dead there, but everything within his life and consciousness is all happening simultaneously, which is like really mind blowing and actually in a way, I think kind of relaxing. You can think, well, here I am right now. Oh my God, I'm starting this new job tomorrow, or I'm really stressed out about X, Y, or Z. But you think about your entire life or all consciousness that you've ever had, you can still be that version of you that's on a great hike in the woods, or you in college, whatever, some great memory you have. You can think of yourself on the spectrum of life rather than just this moment that you may be overreacting to or stressed out about in the moment. And it's funny too, because like I'm really into practicing gratitude. I know there's a lot of different, these days for people to feel better about their lives, feel more positive, you practice gratitude. It's a big thing, or like affirmations and things. And I'm a big proponent of looking at what you are grateful for in your life and repeating it, because literally, I think a big key, I don't say the key to happiness, but a big thing is choosing to focus on what is good in your life rather than constantly thinking about what you don't have, which we are wired to do. I think a lot of us have, just by default, a scarcity mindset where you are looking for threats. I know that's how I've certainly been throughout my life. So I've had to train myself to look at what I do have that I value and think of, man, if I didn't have that, that would suck, And these aliens, which I keep wanting to say the name of them, but I'm going to let you, experience that in the book for yourself. But they talk about that in the book, like they actually preach. I forget the exact line, but basically looking at the good moments in your life. You have this big life spectrum. You are all things at all time that you've ever been. Why don't you just focus on the things that are good, as opposed to, oh, this body is dead now. Look at the good things that are in your life. So in a weird way, the aliens that abduct Billy Pilgrim in this book are, they launched the gratitude practice in my mind. So I really enjoyed this book. It took me all over the place. I didn't expect to, like, if you would have told me that I was going to read a fractured narrative like that, where a guy's time traveling and there's aliens, if I'd have heard that a few years ago, I'd say I have absolutely no interest in that. But I think this is a huge commentary on the severity. Oh, and the book is hilarious too. I don't want to go on for way too much longer, but this book is hilarious. Vonnegut is extremely funny. There are well-placed F-bombs in this book. There are ridiculous characters. There are commentaries about the wife that Billy Pilgrim eventually ends up with that had me dying laughing. Just, you know, um, if you're overweight, just trigger warning, I guess, when it comes to Billy Pilgrim's wife in this book. But it had just the way that he said certain things had me cracking up. But there was a purpose to it too. It wasn't just to belittle, somebody who's overweight. There was a purpose to it. I don't want to give any more away, but I think the humor in this book is amazing. And Vonnegut, he's just totally hitting his stride here. And I'm really excited to read some of his other stuff. Again, I've only read a couple so far. So yeah, I really enjoyed this book, and despite it being so funny, I think there's a very serious underlying message here about people that experience this kind of trauma, what it can do to their psyche, how it can break you from reality, and how you can manage or deal with all that when all is said and done. So, have you read Slaughterhouse-Five? What did you think of it? Have you read other Vonnegut? Where else would you recommend me going on this postmodern novel journey? I'm going to take a little bit of a pivot, I think, from it to something else, because I like to, once I finish a novel, I like to go in a different direction usually. But I really, really enjoyed this. Let me know your thoughts of Slaughterhouse-Five and Kurt Vonnegut. I highly recommend this book, and I'll talk to you next time.